It was the kind of summer morning that smelled like grilled meat and freshly cut grass, the kind where every homeowner in the cul-de-sac rolled out their shiny new grills to prove who could char a steak to magazine perfection. I had just finished marinating the ribs, the smell of smoked paprika already making the neighbor's dog whine through the fence, when I heard the unmistakable metallic screech of wheels across concrete. I turned just in time to see my grill, my brand-new stainless steel, propane beauty that had cost me a week's paycheck, being rolled down my driveway by none other than Karen. She was in her pink visor, holding the handle like she was leading a parade float, and without even glancing back she yelled, "It's for the block barbecue. We all have to contribute." I stood there frozen, a spatula still in my hand, trying to figure out if this was some weird dream or a neighborhood prank gone wrong. Then I realized she wasn't joking. She was really stealing my grill in broad daylight while her little yappy dog barked like a cheerleader escort. That was the moment I decided that, if she wanted my grill for her party, I was going to give her exactly what she asked for, just not in the way she expected. The first few minutes after the theft were a mixture of disbelief and fury. I followed her down the street, my sandals slapping the pavement, yelling her name as calmly as I could manage. She didn't even slow down, pretending not to hear, and by the time I reached her yard, the grill was already parked on her patio like it had always belonged there. A group of her friends were setting up folding tables, and Karen was pointing at them with her manicured finger, shouting orders about potato salad and lemonade. When I demanded my grill back, she gave me a look that could curdle milk. "You weren't using it," she said flatly, "and this is a community event. Everyone is pitching in." I reminded her I hadn't volunteered, but she waved her hand dismissively, already turning away. "You'll get it back when we're done. Don't make this awkward." That phrase, "don't make this awkward," echoed in my head like a taunt. By midday I was back on my porch, fuming. I tried to focus on anything else, but every time the wind shifted, I caught the smell of my own grill cooking someone else's burgers. It was personal now. My friend Tom from across the street wandered over, saw my empty patio, and raised an eyebrow. "Didn't you just buy that thing last week?" he asked. When I told him what happened, he laughed so hard he nearly dropped his soda. "She really rolled it out of your driveway? You've got to get her back, man. This is Reddit-level material." That sparked something in me, a mix of righteous anger and mischief. Maybe it was petty, but at that moment I wanted justice with a side of entertainment. Karen had a reputation in our neighborhood. She was the self-appointed social coordinator, the kind of person who believed every driveway crack, fence height, or noise level fell under her jurisdiction. She didn't even run the HOA, but she acted like its president, secretary, and police force combined. Everyone had a story about her. The time she reported a kid for selling lemonade without a permit, or the time she called animal control because someone's cat looked too suspicious. So when she commandeered my grill, it wasn't about the metal, it was about her control. She had to prove she could take without asking and still come out the hero. That night, while her party music thumped through the neighborhood, I stood at my window and watched. The fairy lights twinkled over her patio, the guests were laughing, and Karen was basking in the attention. She was telling someone how she saved the barbecue after my supposed absence had jeopardized the event. The audacity of it made me grin in disbelief. Tom texted me, "You gonna let her get away with that?" And I replied, "Not a chance." That's when the idea hit me. Not a simple confrontation or a shouted argument, but something poetic. If she thought she was getting the best barbecue in town, I'd make sure she remembered it forever. The next morning, the neighborhood was quiet again except for the clatter of garbage cans. I walked over to retrieve my grill, only to find Karen in her bathrobe standing beside it with her arms crossed. "Oh, you're early," she said. "We were going to clean it for you, but you can take it." The grease stains told another story. I noticed some deep scratches on the lid, a missing knob, and a smear of sauce that had hardened like glue. When I pointed it out, she shrugged. You can't expect things to stay perfect after a party, dear. Consider it community wear and tear. I stared at her, forcing myself to stay calm, and said quietly, "Don't worry, Karen. I'll make it right." She smiled as if she'd won. That smile would haunt her soon enough. For the next few days, I began my quiet preparation. I started researching recipes, not the delicious kind, but the deceptive ones. The kind that looked gourmet but tasted atrocious. I found cans of wet dog food that resembled chili when mixed with sauce and spices. I even bought decorative platters and little flags to label each dish. Tom thought I'd lost my mind, but when I explained my plan, he laughed so hard he almost cried. "You're not just getting even, you're making history," he said. The plan was simple. Karen was planning another neighborhood get-together that weekend, a thank-you cookout for everyone who attended. I would offer to help cater as a peace gesture. She'd never say no to free help, her ego wouldn't let her. When Friday came, I loaded my car with trays of disguised dog food, perfectly garnished with parsley and little drizzles of sauce. Every bite looked like a professional chef's masterpiece. Karen greeted me with exaggerated politeness, clearly proud of her victory from the previous week. "Oh, you're contributing this time. How lovely," she said. I nodded, hiding my grin, and set up my trays on her long buffet table. People began to arrive, greeting her with smiles and compliments about her hosting. The air smelled of smoke and sweetness, the sound of laughter filling the yard. Nobody suspected a thing. As I watched the first guests dig in, I felt a thrill that was equal parts fear and satisfaction. Karen took a plate herself, laughing about how she'd brought the community together again. The moment she lifted the fork to her mouth, I could barely keep a straight face. I didn't want anyone to get hurt, just a taste of poetic justice. My plan wasn't cruel, it was symbolic. Still, seeing her eyes widen slightly at the first bite was pure art. She chewed, forced a smile, and nodded approvingly as if everything was fine. The real reactions would come later, and when they did, it would be glorious. That night, as the laughter continued and Karen basked in her moment, I leaned back against the fence with Tom, both of us pretending to be innocent bystanders. "You think she'll figure it out?" he whispered. I shook my head. "Not yet. But when she does, she'll wish she never touched my grill." For now, I let her enjoy her stolen spotlight, unaware that the real feast had only just begun. The stage was set for a weekend the neighborhood would never forget, and I couldn't wait to watch karma serve its course, slow-cooked and perfectly seasoned. The morning after Karen's second barbecue began with a silence that didn't feel natural, the kind of quiet that hides tension beneath it. I was out watering my lawn, pretending to mind my own business, when I saw the first clue that my plan had landed exactly as I hoped. Karen's husband, Greg, came stumbling out of their house clutching his stomach, his face pale as a sheet. A few minutes later, one of her friends who had attended the barbecue pulled up in her SUV, got out, and started shouting across the lawn for Karen. The words carried over the breeze, sharp and panicked. Something about everyone feeling sick, about the terrible food at the party. I could barely hide my grin behind the hose. For once, Karen wasn't the queen of the cul-de-sac, she was its scandal. By noon, half the neighborhood knew something was wrong. People were whispering, sharing theories, and glancing toward her house like it had become cursed. Every time a door opened, another rumor escaped, and by the time the mail truck arrived, even the driver asked what happened at the fancy barbecue. I kept up my act of innocence, offering polite concern whenever someone mentioned it. "Oh no, food poisoning? That's terrible," I'd say, trying not to sound too cheerful. Tom nearly burst from holding in his laughter. He came over that afternoon, pretending to borrow my wrench, and whispered that he'd overheard Karen's meltdown. Apparently, she'd spent the morning scrubbing her grill, convinced it was contaminated. "She's blaming the meat supplier," Tom said, grinning. "She called the grocery store demanding to speak to the manager." I almost felt bad, almost. What I hadn't expected, though, was how far Karen's humiliation would spread. By evening, the neighborhood group chat was on fire. Someone had posted a photo of her ruined party, showing half-empty plates and miserable faces. The comments were brutal. People joked about the mystery meat and asked if she was starting a new diet trend. For someone who lived off image and control, this was pure chaos. But even as satisfaction warmed me, I knew I had to play the long game. Karen was the kind of person who didn't take humiliation quietly. She'd stew in her anger and look for someone to blame, and I had to make sure she never suspected me. So I stayed polite, even sympathetic. The next day, I brought over a bottle of disinfectant spray and said I'd heard about what happened. Maybe it was cross-contamination, I suggested with a straight face. She looked at me with suspicion but also desperation. She needed to believe she was still respected. Her voice was shaky as she said, "It's been a nightmare. Half my guests called to say they were sick. I don't understand it. I used the best ingredients." I nodded, murmuring that maybe she'd been unlucky. Inside, I was practically glowing with amusement. It was like watching a tyrant try to rebuild her empire with soggy cardboard. Still, Karen's ego wouldn't allow her to disappear quietly. 2 days later, she started a new campaign of damage control. She went door to door apologizing for the unfortunate incident and blaming the grocery store for spoiled meat. She even printed flyers about safe grilling practices and left them in everyone's mailbox, like she was some public health advocate. Tom showed me one and nearly fell over laughing. "She's turning her failure into a seminar," he said. I couldn't believe it either, but that was Karen's power. She refused to lose face. That night, I heard her arguing with Greg through the open window. He was sick of her antics, saying she embarrassed them enough already. She snapped back that the neighbors were gossiping, and she had to fix her image. Their voices carried down the street, and more than one curtain twitched as people listened. By the end of the week, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every time I passed Karen's yard, I caught her watching me from behind her blinds. Maybe she sensed something, maybe not, but I knew she'd never outright accuse me. She needed me to stay one of the reasonable neighbors, the kind she could still manipulate socially. So I gave her what she wanted: smiles, small talk, and harmless gestures. But behind the scenes, Tom and I were already planning part 2, not out of cruelty, but because we knew Karen never truly learned her lessons. Sure enough, our prediction came true sooner than expected. On Saturday morning, she showed up at my door with a fake smile plastered on her face. "Hi," she said, drawing out the word like she was tasting something sour. "I wanted to apologize again for the misunderstanding last week. I hope there's no hard feelings." I nodded slowly, pretending to be magnanimous. "Of course, Karen. Water under the bridge." Then she leaned in, lowering her voice. "I'm planning a small makeup party next weekend. Just close neighbors, nothing big. I'd love for you to bring your famous marinades. Everyone still talks about how good your food usually smells." The nerve of her almost made me laugh out loud. After everything, she still wanted to use me, and my reputation, to fix hers. I told her I'd think about it, but the moment she left, Tom and I burst out laughing. "She's actually inviting you to her next disaster," he said. "You can't make this stuff up." That night, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I thought about how people like Karen never really change. They shift tactics, manipulate perceptions, and pretend to apologize only to regain control. Her barbecue fiasco had wounded her pride, but not broken it. If anything, she was doubling down. I had a choice: either let her have her redemption or ensure that her next attempt at glory ended the same way, spectacularly. The thought made me smile. Revenge wasn't about cruelty, it was about balance. She'd stolen my grill, humiliated me in front of everyone, and dismissed me like I didn't matter. What I'd done so far was just the appetizer. The real feast was yet to come. Over the next few days, I began subtly collecting information. I overheard her boasting to another neighbor that she'd learned from her mistake and was hiring a local chef to help this time. She mentioned imported steaks, new decorations, and even a live musician. Clearly, she wanted this event to be her grand redemption arc. That gave me the perfect opening. I reached out to a friend who ran a pet store and asked if he could spare a few empty dog food cans with labels intact. Then I went online and ordered a few catering trays identical to the ones she'd used before. Tom, who was in on every step, couldn't believe how far I was willing to go. "You're turning this into an art form," he said. "Just wait," I replied. "If she wants a perfect show, I'll give her one." Meanwhile, Karen was busy parading around the neighborhood again, making sure everyone knew she was personally overseeing everything this time. She even sent out printed invitations with her signature pink cursive font. The message read, "A celebration of friendship and community." Tom joked that it should have said, "A celebration of arrogance and denial." As the day approached, I noticed her yard filling with new decorations, balloons, fairy lights, and a massive banner that read "Welcome back to the Grill Queen's party." I nearly choked on my coffee when I saw it. The sheer confidence of the woman was astounding. The day before the event, I made sure my role in her plan was set. She asked me to bring a few snack trays, since she was focusing on the main course. I agreed with a straight face, already knowing what I'd prepare. This time, it wouldn't be about taste. It would be about timing. I wanted her downfall to happen in front of everyone, publicly and unmistakably, but without any harm to anyone else. It needed to be clean, controlled, and unforgettable. Late that night, as I finished preparing my contribution, I looked out the window toward Karen's glowing backyard. Music was already playing as she tested her speakers, and I could see her silhouette dancing in the light, rehearsing her grand return. I almost admired her confidence. Almost. When I finally turned in, my mind was alive with anticipation. Tomorrow would mark the end of her reign of neighborhood tyranny, and all it would take was one last push, one carefully orchestrated reveal. I could feel that familiar rush building again, the mix of justice, irony, and satisfaction that came from turning arrogance into its own downfall. Karen had stolen my grill, my peace, and my patience. Tomorrow, I'd take something far more valuable from her. Her image, her illusion of control, and the respect she thought she owned. As the crickets hummed outside and the night deepened, I couldn't help but laugh quietly to myself. The show wasn't over. It was only intermission, and Act 2 was going to be unforgettable. By the time the weekend rolled around again, Karen's redemption barbecue had become the only thing people were talking about. The entire neighborhood buzzed with curiosity, half out of pity and half out of anticipation for whatever spectacle she'd deliver this time. Everyone knew she was desperate to recover her reputation after the mystery meat incident, and that desperation made her even more determined to make this party flawless. She had decorations strung up days in advance, hired a local teen to help mow and edge her lawn, and even paid for a fancy delivery of fresh flowers to scatter across the tables. She wanted perfection, and she was going to shove it down everyone's throat whether they liked it or not. From my porch, I watched her run around in her designer sneakers, barking orders at Greg and the helpers like a drill sergeant. She had no idea that her meticulous planning was walking her straight into my next masterpiece. I spent the morning pretending to help, carrying over a few supplies and flashing my most convincing friendly smile. Karen gushed about how good it felt to rebuild the community spirit, which was her way of saying she needed everyone's approval again. She mentioned how the local paper might even stop by for photos of the event because one of her friends had connections. The thought made me almost choke on my coffee. She was inviting public witnesses to her downfall, and that was a gift I hadn't even dared to dream of. She thanked me for agreeing to bring the snack trays, and promised me a prime seat near the buffet. I told her it was the least I could do after she'd worked so hard to make things right. If sarcasm burned calories, I'd have been a marathon runner by noon. Tom came by just before the event started. He was practically vibrating with excitement and paranoia at the same time. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered, peeking over the hedge like we were planning a bank heist. I nodded. Everything's ready. No one's getting hurt, and it's poetic justice. He grinned and handed me a camera. You'll want to remember her face when it happens, he said. That camera would turn out to be the best idea of the day. My snack trays looked perfect, neatly garnished little portions of faux gourmet bites, each hiding a harmless but horrifying surprise. One tray was filled with mashed dog biscuits shaped into savory truffles. Another had pâté made from canned food so carefully seasoned that no one could tell. It was more art than prank, and I couldn't help admiring my own handiwork as I loaded them into the car. The afternoon sun was blazing as I arrived at Karen's house. Music was already blasting, kids were running around, and the smell of charcoal filled the air. Greg stood by the grill flipping steaks while Karen fluttered around like a queen bee in a pink summer dress, greeting guests with a wide, artificial smile. When she saw me, her eyes lit up. "Oh, wonderful! You're here!" she called, motioning for me to set up near the main table. She gestured to her friends and loudly announced, "This is the neighbor who makes those incredible sauces I told you about." I smiled politely, thinking to myself that she'd regret every word of that sentence soon enough. I arranged my trays neatly beside the main dishes, making sure everything looked magazine perfect. No one suspected a thing. As the afternoon wore on, the party reached its peak. Karen gave a little speech about unity and turning mistakes into memories, and people clapped politely, probably just waiting for the food. I noticed how proud she looked when guests began complimenting her setup. Her smile stretched wider with every approving nod. When she invited everyone to dig in, I took a step back, pretending to sip a drink while my pulse raced. One by one, people started filling their plates, piling steaks, salads, and, most importantly, my appetizers. The first bites went down with cheerful chatter. Then came the confused looks. I saw one woman wrinkle her nose and whisper something to her husband. Another man took a small bite, frowned, and reached for his napkin. The murmurs began spreading like ripples in a pond. Karen, oblivious at first, was busy posing for a photo with her drink raised high. Then the first honest comment cut through the crowd. Karen, what's in this?" someone asked, holding up one of my fancy-looking truffles. She turned with her rehearsed smile still in place. "Oh, that's our neighbor's specialty. Isn't it lovely?" The man's face twisted as he sniffed it again. "It smells weird." Others began agreeing, comparing note. A few discreetly spit into napkins, while one kid blurted, "It tastes like dog food," and immediately everyone froze. Karen laughed nervously, brushing it off, but the kid's mom wasn't having it. "No, seriously, this does taste off." "What's in it?" she demanded. Karen's face drained of color as she looked at me for backup, and I shrugged innocently. "It's just an experimental recipe," I said lightly. "All natural ingredients." The guests didn't look convinced. The whispers turned into a wave of suspicion. Karen's perfect image cracked visibly as people started leaving their plates half-eaten. Greg came over, sniffed one of the trays, and grimaced. "Karen, this stuff smells like dog chow." She rounded on me, her polite tone collapsing into fury. "What did you bring here?" she hissed through clenched teeth. I tilted my head, pretending to be confused. "You asked me to bring something memorable," I said. "Guess it worked." The look on her face was priceless, equal parts rage and panic. Before she could respond, one of the teens who'd been recording the party for fun shouted, "It's going viral already." He was laughing as he showed his phone screen to his friends. Someone had posted a short clip of Karen's guests reacting to the gourmet dog food, and the caption read, "Grill Queen strikes again, literally serving dog food." The crowd burst into laughter, and Karen's attempt to regain control melted faster than ice on a sidewalk. She tried to save face, claiming it was a prank gone wrong, but no one the perfect revenge dinner. For a few days after the second barbecue disaster, the neighborhood felt like it had collectively woken from a long dream and finally realized that Karen wasn't the queen she thought she was. Her house, once the social hub of every weekend, had become a ghost of its former self. The decorations were gone, the lawn was overgrown, and the laughter that used to spill from her porch was replaced by silence and the occasional thud of her door slamming in frustration. I didn't see Greg around much anymore, though his car was still parked out front, a silent witness to the tension brewing inside. I thought maybe the storm had finally passed, that Karen would retreat quietly and lick her wounds, but I should have known better. People like her don't give up, they reload. It started subtly at first, with her posting overly cheerful messages in the neighborhood group chat about how every mistake is an opportunity for growth. Then came the sudden apologies to certain neighbors, the small attempts to test whether she could still command attention. But the shift came one Thursday morning when a moving truck arrived in front of my house, and I found her standing on the sidewalk, watching like a hawk. I was bringing in my mail when she walked over with that fake smile that had become her trademark. "Looks like you've got some new furniture coming," she said in a tone that dripped with rehearsed friendliness. I told her it was just a new patio set I'd ordered. She nodded slowly, eyes flicking toward my grill like it was a reminder of her defeat. "I was thinking," she began, "maybe we should put all that silliness behind us. I'm hosting a charity cookout next month for the local shelter. It's a good cause, and it would look great if we showed the community we can work together." I stared at her, trying to process whether she was genuinely extending an olive branch or setting another trap. "You mean after the last events?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, people forget things. Besides, this one's official. The shelter director's coming, local reporters too. You could help with the setup. I think it'd be great publicity for both of us." That last part said it all. She wasn't trying to reconcile. She was trying to rebuild her image using me as a prop. I told her I'd consider it and shut the door before she could say more. That night, I sat with Tom on the porch, telling him about her new plan. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped his drink. "She's got no shame," he said. "After feeding people dog food, she wants to host a charity cookout?" I nodded. "It's insanity mixed with arrogance. But maybe it's the perfect chance to end this once and for all." We talked for hours, tossing ideas back and forth, until finally a new plan formed, something clean, clever, and fitting. I didn't want to hurt her, just make sure she could never weaponize community kindness again. Tom leaned in as I explained it, his grin growing wider by the minute. "You're diabolical," he whispered. "And I love it." The plan involved turning her obsession with appearances against her, exposing the truth in front of the very people she wanted to impress. I went to bed that night with a sense of calm purpose. Karen wanted a public stage? Fine. I'd let her have one. But this time, she wouldn't just fall, she'd unravel herself. The weeks leading up to the charity event felt like watching a train being rebuilt with broken parts. Karen threw herself into the preparations, posting constant updates on social media about the amazing turnout expected and the importance of giving back. She got local sponsors, printed flyers, and even convinced the HOA to chip in for decorations. Her house looked like a festival ground again, all streamers and optimism. The neighborhood, half amused and half curious, agreed to attend. She didn't realize that most of them were coming less for charity and more to see if she'd crash and burn again. I played my role perfectly, offering to help with setup, fixing minor technical issues, and pretending to admire her organizational talent. Every time she talked about how this event would prove she'd changed, I nodded along, quietly marking each opportunity I'd use to flip the script. On the morning of the event, the air buzzed with activity. Volunteers bustled about, setting up tables and tents. The shelter van arrived, and Karen welcomed them like a politician greeting voters. She wore a pastel dress, the same shade as her perfect smile, and radiated confidence. I showed up early with my contribution, a brand new grill setup I'd borrowed from Tom's brother, complete with custom covers. Karen's eyes widened when she saw it. "Oh, how professional," she said. See, teamwork does wonders. I smiled and told her I'd make sure everything ran smoothly. What she didn't know was that the real surprise was already hidden within the event itself. I'd tipped off a few neighbors, including Tom, to record certain moments, but the real trap was informational. I'd printed flyers too, ones that looked identical to her charity flyers but carried an extra paragraph near the bottom, a simple line that read, "All donations today go directly to the local animal shelter, where they'll be used to feed and care for dogs rescued from neglect." It sounded innocent enough, but to anyone who remembered her past fiasco, it was the perfect echo of her humiliation. The event kicked off beautifully. Families arrived, kids ran around with balloons, and the smell of grilled food filled the air. Karen was in her element again, shaking hands and laughing loudly, her earlier scandals fading into forced nostalgia. The mayor even showed up briefly, giving a short speech about community spirit. Cameras flashed, and Karen soaked up every second of it. I stayed in the background, manning the grill with a calm expression. When lunch was served, the crowd lined up eagerly, chatting about how well organized everything was. It went smoothly at first, until the flyers began circulating. Someone picked one up, read the last line, and snorted with laughter. "Hey Karen," he called, "feeding dogs again, huh?" The words cut through the cheerful noise like a siren. Karen turned, confusion flickering across her face. More people started reading, giggling, whispering to each other. Within minutes, the laughter spread across the field. Phones came out, photos were snapped, and suddenly the charity cookout had transformed into a déjà vu of mockery. Karen's face went from pink to red to an alarming shade of purple. "What is this?" she shouted, snatching a flyer from someone's hand. Her eyes scanned the text, and when she saw the fateful line, her mouth fell open. "This isn't funny. Who did this?" she demanded. I walked over, keeping my tone calm. "It's just a clarification," I said. "After last time, I figured transparency would help the cause." A few people chuckled at that, and someone clapped sarcastically. The shelter representative, a kind older woman who had no idea of the context, tried to defuse the situation by thanking everyone for their generosity, but by then it was too late. The moment had gone viral in real time. Tom was streaming it live to the same Facebook group that had mocked her last event. The comments were flooding in again, things like "Grill Queen Returns Part 3" and "At least the dogs are eating well this time." Karen's attempts to restore order turned into a shouting match with Greg, who'd arrived late and was clearly done with her public disasters. He told her to stop embarrassing herself, and when she snapped back, he walked away for good. The crowd started dispersing slowly, most of them laughing and shaking their heads. The shelter still collected donations, and ironically, the event ended up raising a decent amount of money. But no one credited Karen. The story spreading online was that she'd accidentally made another dog food-related blunder, and people couldn't get enough of it. When I walked home that evening, my phone buzzed with messages again. Screenshots of the live stream, edited memes, and headlines from local community pages filled my inbox. Tom met me at the fence, his grin so wide it looked painful. "She's officially immortalized," he said. "3 viral disasters in a row. You're a legend." I laughed, shaking my head. "No, she did it to herself. I just held up the mirror." Later that night, I looked out my window and saw Karen standing alone on her porch, staring at the mess of decorations and half-packed boxes. Her phone glowed in her hand as she scrolled through the storm of comments that had turned her once proud persona into a neighborhood punchline. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the smug look she wore the day she rolled my grill out of my driveway, the way she dismissed me like an inconvenience. Karma wasn't cruel, it was poetic. She'd wanted to use community to glorify herself, and in the end, the community defined her instead, as the woman who served dog food 3 times. I turned off the light, closed the blinds, and finally allowed myself to relax. The saga of the grill, the dog food, and the self-proclaimed queen had finally come full circle. The aftermath of the charity disaster spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, and by the next morning Karen's name was once again plastered across local gossip threads and online community pages. She had become the punchline to every barbecue joke imaginable, and no amount of explaining could repair what was left of her reputation. I heard people talking about her at the grocery store, at the post office, even at the small diner near the highway where locals gathered for breakfast. Everyone had their version of the story, each one funnier or crueler than the last. Some said she had intentionally served dog food again to get attention, others claimed she was running an underground prank channel. Either way, she had officially crossed the line from neighborhood authority to neighborhood spectacle. Greg had packed his things and moved into a motel the very next day, leaving behind a terse note on the community forum that simply said he needed peace and quiet. For once, Karen wasn't barking orders or handing out flyers. Her house stood silent, her blinds drawn, and the only sign of life was the faint glow of her phone's screen through the window at night. It was strange to see her so defeated, but there was a small, gnawing feeling in me that maybe, just maybe, this had gone too far. Tom didn't see it that way. He dropped by with 2 coffees and the same grin he'd worn since the first scandal. "You've done it," he said proudly, handing me a cup. "The tyrant of the cul-de-sac is officially dethroned." I smiled weakly, unsure how to feel. On one hand, I had finally put an end to her arrogance, but on the other, I couldn't shake the image of her standing alone on her porch, staring into nothing. "She's miserable," I said quietly. Tom shrugged. "She made everyone else miserable for years. Call it balance." Maybe he was right. Still, part of me wondered if revenge, once started, ever really ends. I spent the rest of that day trying to go about normal life, mowing the lawn, cleaning the patio, and fixing a few things around the house. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of Karen's curtains moving, like she was watching from behind them. She didn't come outside, not even to collect her mail. By evening, the sun dipped low, and the street felt unusually calm, almost eerie. I thought it was finally over, that she would either move away or fade into obscurity. But fate, as always, had other plans. The next weekend brought a new twist I never saw coming. Early Saturday morning, a delivery truck stopped at Karen's driveway. I watched as 2 men unloaded boxes of garden supplies, paint cans, and new outdoor light. Then, to my surprise, a small construction crew arrived. By noon, the sound of hammers echoed down the street. Tom wandered over, looking baffled. "What in the world is she doing?" he asked. I had no idea, but curiosity gnawed at me. Later that day, while pretending to check my mailbox, I overheard her giving instructions to the workers. "The fence needs to be higher," she said sharply. "I want complete privacy." The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. After years of policing everyone else's property, she was now building walls to hide from the very people she'd once ruled over. Over the next few days, the construction continued, new fences, fresh paint, and bright floodlights that lit up her entire yard like a fortress. It was clear she wasn't leaving. She was digging in, trying to reclaim her control in a new way. At first, I thought her retreat was harmless, even pitiful. But then the complaints began. One night, my living room was flooded with blinding white light from her new motion sensors. They were so powerful that even the slightest movement, a passing car, a stray cat, would trigger them. The entire street looked like an airport runway. Tom texted me, saying he couldn't sleep because his bedroom glowed like a hospital ward. Another neighbor, Linda, said her dogs barked all night because of the lights. When I went over the next morning to ask Karen if she could adjust them, she opened the door with a strange, calm smile. "Security," she said simply. "I can't be too careful. After all, people have been targeting me." I tried reasoning with her, but it was useless. "If you don't want the lights in your eyes," she added coldly, "maybe close your blinds." That was the old Karen speaking, the one who couldn't resist a jab even when she was losing. By the end of the week, everyone was complaining again, and this time, I wasn't the only one plotting. The neighborhood that had once been divided by her arrogance was now united in shared irritation. A secret meeting took place at Tom's garage, where half a dozen neighbors gathered to vent their frustrations. "She's turned her house into a lighthouse," one of them said. "I can't even enjoy my backyard anymore," another added. Someone joked about cutting her power, which got a few laughs but no real support. Still, the idea of a collective response started brewing. They wanted peace, but they also wanted payback. I listened quietly, not wanting to lead another round of chaos, but deep down I knew Karen wouldn't stop until someone made her. She needed to feel consequences that couldn't be laughed off online, something real, something she couldn't twist into victimhood. The opportunity came unexpectedly a few days later. I was walking my dog when I noticed the new fence workers had accidentally dumped paint thinner near her flower bed. The smell was strong, and the liquid had pooled near her electrical outlets for the lights. It wasn't dangerous yet, but it was a clear violation of safety codes. That gave me an idea, not to sabotage her, but to let her own carelessness expose her again. I called the city inspection department anonymously and reported a possible electrical hazard. 2 days later, an inspector showed up while Karen was outside pruning her new plant. The conversation was brief but explosive. The inspector pointed out multiple violations, from faulty wiring to unapproved fixtures. She tried arguing, claiming she had permits, but he wasn't buying it. By the end of the day, she was handed a citation and ordered to shut off her entire lighting system until it was fixed. The neighborhood rejoiced quietly that night. For the first time in weeks, the street was bathed in darkness and peace. You'd think that would have humbled her, but Karen's pride was too stubborn to break completely. Instead, she tried a new tactic: sympathy. She started posting online about how she was being harassed and targeted by jealous neighbors. She painted herself as a victim of bullying, conveniently skipping the part where she'd been the cause of every conflict. A few strangers online offered her support, but locally nobody bought her act. Her reputation was beyond repair. One afternoon, she left her house for what looked like a meeting downtown, and Tom couldn't resist sneaking a peek over her fence. He came back laughing so hard he could barely talk. "She's covered her patio in fake cameras," he said. "Plastic ones, not even plugged in." That image stuck with me. Karen surrounding herself with illusions of control, even when reality had long slipped away. As the weeks went by, her house became a monument to her downfall. Once the centerpiece of every social gathering, it now stood as a symbol of isolation and stubborn pride. The neighbors had moved on, the gossip had faded, and even Tom stopped joking about her. Life was peaceful again, almost. Boring. But one evening, as I was locking up for the night, I noticed a small package on my porch. There was no return address, just a card inside that read, "Congratulations, you won." I opened the box cautiously and burst out laughing when I saw what was inside: a miniature plastic grill and a tiny can of dog food glued to it like a trophy. It was Karen's handwriting on the card. I didn't know whether it was sarcasm, surrender, or the closest thing to an apology she could manage. Either way, it made me realize something. The war was finally over. That night, I placed the little grill trophy on my kitchen shelf, right next to the window overlooking her house. For the first time in months, I felt a genuine sense of closure. Maybe Karen wasn't all bad, just someone so obsessed with control that she couldn't function without it. Maybe deep down she realized how ridiculous it had all become. As I stood there, looking out into the quiet street, I thought about how strange people could be, how a single stolen grill could ignite months of chaos and karma. The neighborhood would heal, and even Karen, in her own warped way, would find peace eventually. But one thing was certain: every time I smelled barbecue in the air again, I would smile, remembering the wild summer when the self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac got served the best dish of all, her own medicine. Months passed after the chaos of that unforgettable summer, and the neighborhood finally began to settle into a new rhythm. The grass grew back where Karen's parties once left muddy patches, the sidewalks were quiet again, and the air felt lighter without the constant buzz of her drama. Life had gone back to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after a season of pure madness. I found myself spending more time outdoors, tending to my garden, fixing the small things I had ignored while all the commotion was happening. The scent of fresh soil and the hum of sprinklers replaced the memory of burned steaks and shouting guests. Most neighbors avoided even mentioning Karen anymore, as if saying her name might bring the chaos back. She had retreated fully into her home, venturing out only occasionally to pick up groceries or mail. Her once perfect lawn had turned patchy, and the pink flamingos she used to display proudly were now faded and leaning sideways like tired sentries. The queen of the cul-de-sac had become a ghost haunting her own castle, and part of me couldn't help feeling that the silence she had created for herself was the cruelest punishment of all. One crisp Saturday morning, I noticed something strange. A moving van was parked in front of her house again, and two men were carrying boxes out instead of in. For a moment I thought she was finally moving away, and I felt a mix of relief and curiosity. I walked over casually, pretending to check my mailbox when she appeared at the door. She looked different, older somehow, her once perfect hair pulled back messily, her face pale and tired. But her eyes still had that flicker of pride, that need to maintain control even when she had none. "Looks like you're heading somewhere new," I said lightly. She gave a small, tight smile. "Just downsizing," she replied. "I've decided this place has too many memories." The way she said memories carried more weight than the word deserved, and for a brief moment, it felt like we were two soldiers acknowledging the same battlefield. "I guess it's time for a change," I said, and she nodded. "Yes. For everyone," she replied, then turned to supervise the movers. I didn't ask where she was going, I didn't need to. The important thing was that she was leaving, and with her departure, the last trace of the endless neighborhood conflict was going too. As the van drove off later that afternoon, several neighbors gathered quietly to watch. Nobody clapped, nobody jeered. There was just a shared sense of finality, like the end of a long, bizarre chapter in all our lives. Tom stood beside me, sipping his coffee, shaking his head slowly. "Can you believe it's over?" he said. "I half expected her to haunt this place forever." I laughed. "She'll find a new neighborhood," I said. "Someone else to boss around." He smirked. "Let's hope they have stronger stomachs than we do." For the rest of the evening, the street was filled with a kind of peace I hadn't felt in ages. Kids played catch, someone grilled burgers, and the smell of barbecue drifted gently across the yards without the tension it used to carry. I fired up my own grill for the first time since everything happened, the familiar hiss of the propane and the crackle of the flames sounding almost symbolic. As I flipped the first burger, I felt an odd sense of satisfaction. Not the vengeful kind, but the kind that comes when things finally settle into balance again. Later that night, while cleaning up the dishes, I noticed a small envelope taped to my front door. There was no name on it, just a piece of tape holding it in place. Curious, I opened it and found a short handwritten note inside. It said, "For what it's worth, I shouldn't have touched your grill. I was wrong. Maybe you were right about karma. Take care." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. The handwriting was unmistakably Karen's. For a moment I stood there in silence, rereading it. It wasn't much, barely even an apology, but coming from her, it meant everything. It was the closest thing to closure I could have asked for. I folded the note carefully and placed it inside a drawer where I kept little memories of strange events, things that reminded me life could be both ridiculous and poetic at the same time. The note wasn't a trophy, just a reminder that even people like Karen were capable of realizing when they'd gone too far, even if it took humiliation to reach that point. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood slowly began to repair its collective image. The HOA meetings became less tense, the gossip chain grew quieter, and people started helping each other again without suspicion. It was almost as if Karen's departure had lifted a curse. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, Tom joined me with a beer in each hand. "You know," he said, "you should write this whole thing down. Nobody would believe it otherwise." I chuckled. "Who'd read something like that?" He grinned. "Everyone. It's got everything: drama, revenge, humiliation, a crazy neighbor. You could post it online. Title it something like 'Karen Stole My Grill for Her Barbecue, So I Catered Her Party with Dog Food.' It'd go viral in a heartbeat." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my drink. The irony of it hit me square in the chest. "You think people would even believe it happened?" I asked. Tom shrugged. "Truth doesn't matter. Stories like this live forever because everyone's got a little Karen in their life." His words stuck with me long after he left. That night, I opened my laptop and began typing, more out of curiosity than intention. I started from the beginning: the theft, the barbecue, the revenge, and the chaos that followed. As I wrote, I realized how absurd it all sounded on paper, yet how vividly real it had been. The story flowed out of me like smoke from a chimney, each sentence carrying a mix of humor, frustration, and poetic justice. By the time I finished, the clock read past midnight, but I felt lighter somehow, like I had finally released the last bit of lingering tension. I saved the document, smiled at the ridiculous title Tom had suggested, and shut the laptop. The next morning, with a mix of hesitation and amusement, I posted it anonymously online. I didn't expect much, maybe a few chuckles or comments. But by evening, the post had exploded with attention. People loved it, sharing their own stories of neighborhood drama and overbearing Karens. Comments poured in calling me a legend, a hero, or a mad genius. Some doubted it was real, others swore it had happened to them too. Within days, the story spread beyond Reddit, reaching social media and even small news blogs. Tom was right, it went viral. At first, I found the whole thing hilarious. But as the story grew, I started seeing something deeper in people's reactions. They weren't just laughing at Karen's antics. They were laughing because they'd all faced someone like her, someone entitled, controlling, and blind to their own flaws. The story wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming peace from someone who thought they owned it. That realization made me feel strangely proud, not for humiliating her, but for turning something ugly into something that made people smile. Every time I read a new comment or saw someone quote my story, I felt the same sense of balance I'd felt. That night I fired up my grill again. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about closure, about transforming chaos into something meaningful. Weeks later, I received a letter from the new family who had bought Karen's house. They introduced themselves warmly, thanking me for the friendly welcome they'd heard I'd given others. They mentioned wanting to host a neighborhood cookout soon to meet everyone and asked if I'd bring my famous recipes. The irony made me laugh out loud. For a second, I imagined Karen watching from wherever she'd moved, fuming at the thought of another barbecue taking place in her old backyard. Then I thought about the note she left and hoped maybe she'd found a quieter life somewhere, one without battles over grills and gossip. As for me, I decided to accept the new family's invitation. When the day came, I rolled my grill down the driveway, this time willingly, laughing at how full circle everything had come. As the new neighbors welcomed everyone, the smell of good food filled the air once again. The laughter was genuine, the chatter light, and for the first time in a long while, there was no tension hiding beneath it. Tom raised his cup toward me and said quietly, "No dog food this time, right?" I smirked and shook my head. "No, this time it's all real." The night stretched on with music and stories, the kind of warmth that only comes after surviving a storm. When I looked up at the stars later, I thought about how strange life could be, how a stolen grill had led to chaos, comedy, and eventually a story that people around the world laughed over. It made me realize that sometimes the wildest moments aren't curses but gifts in disguise, teaching you patience, humor, and the art of letting go. As the fire from the grill flickered and the laughter echoed down the street, I knew one thing for certain. I'd never look at a barbecue the same way again.